Go. And Patrick, I'll go over to you, Ed, right? Because you have a few.
Yeah, I'll start first. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're here to meet the author of Hey Kiddo. We're really excited to have Jarrett with us tonight. We've been trying to pull this together for a couple of years, and then COVID got in the way. But here we are. And thank you for coming. And I want to just thank a few people for helping us put this together. This is funded by some grant money that we have at the District Attorney's Office from the Office of Victims of Crime. It's a grant that we have in working with children who have been affected by the opioid epidemic. We also got leadership from the Plymouth County DA's office, Tim Cruz, and also the Plymouth County Sheriff, Joe McDonald. And our partners in this, United Way, the Family Center, Community Connections of Brockton has been one of our partners, and certainly runs our grant for us, and we're super happy to have them here, as well as the Brockton Area Prevention Collaborative, another one of our partners from High Point, do a great job for us in doing our prevention, helping us with prevention work. The Plymouth Youth Development Collaborative out of Plymouth and Miss Maycumber, and of course our friends and our colleagues at PCO, Plymouth County Outreach. I have the honor of telling you that this is going to be approximately an hour tonight. We're so happy to have Jarrett here. If I could ask Mr. Nevins to just queue up the district attorney. Then we're going to come back to Jarrett, and it's going to be all yours, and we're looking forward.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Tim Cruz. For the last 19 years, I've had the honor to serve as the district attorney for Plymouth County. Every day, our office works tirelessly to pursue justice. Each decision and action we take is made with the understanding that our job is to create and build upon the relationships that we have in our county. Justice is about building unified and healthy communities. We embrace the greater moral duties of being a prosecutor. And as a representative of the people, we hold ourselves to the higher standards of fairness, integrity, and fidelity to the communities that we serve. While the majority of our time is focused on overseeing about 20,000 prosecutions a year, we recognize the broader duty to not only prosecute crime, but use our resources and our partnerships to prevent it. At the end of the day, our job is to protect the community, and the best way to protect it is to ensure the healthy development of the next generation. In 2015, Massachusetts witnessed more than 1,700 opioid-related fatal overdoses, 142 of which happened here in Plymouth County. Fentanyl was emerging as a major public health risk. People were reluctant to utilize the Good Samaritan law to call 911 for help, and Narcan was not nearly as widely distributed as it is now. We have to adapt and respond, and to the credit of Plymouth County, we did. Our office, in collaboration with Plymouth County Sheriff Joe McDonald, created the Plymouth County Drug Abuse Task Force. That same year, in an effort to engage all community sectors, Plymouth County was rich with talent, bright minds, and passionate residents ready to tackle the opioid crisis. The task force strategy was and continues to be to address the opioid epidemic by 1, enhancing the capacity of the county, especially through comprehensive data collection and securing financial resources. 2, reducing the opioid demand through education and prevention. 3, reducing the opioid supply through enforcement of traffickers. And 4, augmenting and increasing access to existing treatment and recovery services. Over the last 5 years, Plymouth County has become a national leader in how to respond to a drug crisis. Our local coalitions like the Collaborative and PYDC have been recognized nationally for their work in implementing the Drug-Free Communities Grant. Plymouth County Outreach, all 27 of our police departments, Bridgewater State University, and all of our major hospitals are now a national best practice model on police-assisted recovery. Dr. Dan Muse continues to help us in expanding access to Narcan. Bridgewater State University became the first university in the nation to have Narcan accessible on campus. Joanne Peterson and Learn to Cope are our national voice for parents, coping with the trauma and the loss that comes with addiction. The United Way Family Center has been nationally recognized for its work with drug-exposed children. Grandparents Raising Grandchildren now has 3 different chapters here in Plymouth County alone. To the Moon and Back continues to advocate for children born with neonatal abstinence syndrome and their families. And we continue to train our schools and police departments on trauma-sensitive responses. We have truly changed the way a community deals with a drug crisis. Plymouth County is a shining example of what can happen when all the community sectors, public safety and public health, come and work together. And this is just a snapshot of all the great work that's been done over the years. And we certainly have more work to do and more progress to achieve. I am proud to work alongside all of you. I'm grateful to have been part of all the outstanding work and to have gotten to know some truly incredible people who have dedicated their lives to making our county a better place. Tonight, I'm especially grateful for our relationships with the United Way of Greater Plymouth County's Family Center, the Collaborative and High Point Treatment Center, PYDC, and the Plymouth Area Substance Abuse Prevention Collaborative. I have and will continue to commit our office's time and resources to training, grants, advocacy, and whatever else is needed to get the job done. In particular, these last few years, we have focused on the silent victims of the opioid crisis, drug-exposed children. The ripple effect after an overdose can spread wide, with those closest to the overdose victim, children and families, becoming the first and the hardest hit. The effects of the opioid epidemic on children and families are just starting to be recognized as children lose parents, enter foster care, or move in with grandparents who experience the significant trauma of adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, related to parental substance abuse. In 2018, with support from the Office for Victims of Crime, our task force added a Drug-Exposed Children Initiative subcommittee, also known as DECI, to support the kids who were exposed to overdoses. Rooted in this partnership between our office and the United Way Family Center is the DECI project. First, DECI provides an introductory training to police departments on how to identify kids at the scene of an overdose. Second, DECI works with police to develop protocols for notifying schools when a student's been exposed to an overdose event, and in turn works with schools to support these kids in a program called Handle with Care. Third, DECI partners with Harvard Law School's Trauma and Learner Policy Initiative, provide an introductory session to school staff on how to provide a trauma-sensitive environment. And finally, DECI encourages both the police and the schools to refer children to our grant-funded social worker at the Family Center. She assists kids and caregivers in accessing direct services by connecting clients with the vast United Way network of service providers. This includes behavioral health care, probate and custody support, special education planning, and overall basic needs. I would personally like to thank Dennis Carmen, President of the United Way of Greater Plymouth County, Melinda Nealon, the Executive Director of the Family Center, Katie Mappa, our DECI social worker, and Jen Cantwell, our DECI advocate, as well as the many other staff members at the United Way Family Center for their incredible dedication and innovation in implementing the DECI project. Tonight, we're excited to welcome author Jarrett Krosoczka to Plymouth County, virtually at least anyways, as he shares his own experience of growing up amidst the ripple effects of addiction, particularly as a young child being raised by his grandparents. We've been fortunate to distribute a number of copies of his book, Hey Kiddo, throughout Plymouth County. While we had every intention of hosting Jarrett in person, in the times that we're currently living in, it was not meant to be. But we're pleased to hold tonight's virtual event, and I hope that you will enjoy it. I encourage you to visit our Handle with Care website at hwc.plymouthda.com. Once again, thank you for the work that you do to make Plymouth County a safe and supportive environment for our kids to learn and to grow. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. DA. I'm going to have Jared come on in just 1 second. I will say that I think that if you want to put ask us any Jared any questions, we're going to be monitoring that, and then when Jared's done, then we can kind of go through those. Is that all right with you, sir?
That sounds perfect. That sounds
Great.
perfect.
So without further ado, Jared, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank
Pleasure
you.
to have you.
Oh, well, I'm honored that you all worked so hard to make this happen, and thank you to the district attorney for those powerful words. Thank you to everyone who is here, who works so hard and cares so much about the people in their community. And we're centered here are the kids who are affected by addictions. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my upbringing, and I'm going to tell you about how I got to be doing what I am doing. I am the author and illustrator of more than 40 books for young readers. I feel very fortunate that I've been able to meet with success and be able to share my stories and get them out there to people. It's just really just so wild to me that I can be here in my home in Massachusetts, and my stories get sent out to young readers all across the country. And it started when I was a kid. You know, I do not recall a time in my life in which I did not draw. I've always had art in my life in one way or another. But my earliest memory of making art was this moment here when I was in preschool. We were asked to draw pictures of our mom and dad, pictures of our families. And more likely than not, the reason why I remember this is because it was a little bit traumatizing and othering, because especially back then, we weren't so cognizant of the language we used around kids and who they might have at home. Now we are so much more aware of to use just as much general language as we can to talk about, you know, your grown-ups at home or the caretakers at home. But when you don't have mom and dad at home and you hear the teacher talking about everyone's mom and dad at home, you can't help but feel left out or different. And I did have a mom and dad at home. They were just a generation removed. I was raised by my maternal grandparents, Joseph and Shirley Krosoczka, because their daughter, Leslie, was unable to provide adequate care for me because of her addictions to heroin. So my grandparents, they grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts. They came of age during the Great Depression. My grandfather served in the Navy during World War II. He helped build the highways in Guam. They were high school sweethearts. They were married at 21, 22 years old, and they had 5 children of their own. Their second, the girl on the far left there, that's my mother, Leslie. She had me when she was about 25 years old. As soon as she was pregnant, my birth father, he took off, and my mother tried as hard as she could. She managed to stay off drugs during the pregnancy, as best I know, but then she started slipping up again. And my grandfather saw this and was aware of this and was prepared for this. And he had all of the legal paperwork lined up so that he could gain legal custody of me the moment that he needed to. And that's exactly what Joe and Cheryl did. Now, here we have 2 people who are then in their mid-50s. Their youngest 2 of the 5 were just starting high school. So they were seeing the end of the road for parenthood for them, and then they're saddled with this young child. But you know, they did love every moment of it. They did provide me with opportunities to stay in touch with my mother and see her on occasion. But they more or less, they got a do-over, you know, with parenthood with me, and they would read to me. And of all the books my grandparents read to me, this is the one that sticks out the most. And I'd love to tell you that this is the book I remember, because I could hear my grandfather's voice. I could feel the weight of his body at the edge of my bed while reading this book. I could hear his thick Worcester accent reading the Dr. Seuss rhymes. But mostly I remember this because it gave me nightmares. His Dr. Seuss stuff is just out there. And there's this one scene where these pants are running around by themselves at night. But my grandparents always provided me, with opportunities, and whether that was just giving me a couple dollars when the school had the school book fair, so that I could pick up and fall in love with books. My grandfather would make sure to save the newspaper for me every single day, because he knew I would go right to the comics page. And I was all about Snoopy and Calvin and Hobbes and Garfield. And my grandfather would get me to the comic book store once a month, because I was just obsessed and I needed to know what was going to happen next to the X-Men or Batman or Spider-Man. Now, I learned how to draw the same way artists have been learning to draw and create since the beginning of time, which is emulating the artwork I see around me. Now, as a little kid, that meant I was sitting on the floor of my grandparents' living room with sketchbooks and taking a look at all of those drawings of Snoopy and Garfield in my books and trying to figure out how to draw them. In middle school, I thought maybe I'd grow up to be an animator. So I was drawing all of the Disney characters from the VHS covers from the movies. And as a high school student, I was reading all of the superhero stories. So that is what I was drawing. I was filling my time drawing superheroes. Now, I learned how to write by being an elementary school student. I remember being in 3rd grade, and we were studying Greek mythology, and we had to write our own Greek myths. And my first book, it had a cover, it had a title page, and it was a story about a story about an owl who challenged Hermes, and he wanted to have a flying contest, and the owl cheated, and Hermes was angry, and this story was told with words and pictures, and I just loved everything about this project from third grade. The very last page of this book was the about the author page, which read, Jarrett lives in Worcester, Massachusetts. He goes to Gates Lane School. He liked making this book. And I love that last sentence. He liked making this book because I loved using my imagination. And that's what writing is. Writing is using your imagination, but on paper. So I'd come home from school. Now, my grandmother had this one drawer in her hutch in the dining room that was mine. In that one drawer was paper and pencils and markers and art supplies. And I would just write my own books. So I had these characters. There was an egg, a tomato, a head of lettuce, and a pumpkin. Together they went to this haunted house. And in this haunted house, there was an evil blender. There was an evil toaster that would chase them down. There was an evil microwave. And I would just spend time alone with my thoughts in these sketchbooks. I would make my own comics as well. And so after school and on the weekends, whenever I had some free time, I was using that free time to write and illustrate and draw. And so in the Worcester Public Schools, in the late 1980s, the arts funding got completely cut. And I went from having art class once a week to once a month to not at all. And my grandfather saw this as a real problem because he knew that this was a lifeline for me. He knew that this was the one thing that I was attached to. And I will never forget the moment where he came into my room and handed me a catalog to take classes at the Worcester Art Museum. And at the Worcester Art Museum, I got to be around other like-minded teenagers to make comics, to talk about comics, to talk animation, to make animation. And it truly changed and saved my life. We made our own comics. They got printed. They got sold at the comic book store in Worcester. I played around with animation. And I just love telling stories visually. And I'm so lucky that my grandparents, let me follow that passion. When I was in high school, I was hired to be the cartoonist for the high school newspaper. And that was a big moment too, because then I realized, if my work is printed, people can read it. And if it's printed, I can share my stories. And I love that feeling. And my high school art teacher, on the same time, he brought in these 2 picture books to share with me. And I started thinking about making books for young readers. I went to college to study art, which was an incredible leap of faith for my grandparents. 2 people who grew up during the Great Depression to now who didn't send every single one of their kids to college are going to send their son to art school. But nonetheless, they believed in me. And in art school, I learned about color theory. I took all of the drawing courses that we needed to take, learning about light and shadow and architecture and perspective. We had to take painting courses, and we were learning through observation. And when I became an upperclassman, I took every single writing course I could get my hands on. And out of all of the writing courses I took, my most favorite was a class that was about writing for young readers. And in this class, I wrote a book. It was called Hello, Said the Slug, a story about a slug who wants to be friends with this boy. And, the class ended, and there I was halfway through my junior year, realizing graduation would be here soon enough. And my grandparents were very nervous. And I thought, artists get rejections. Rejections are a natural part of the process in any artist's career. So I thought, well, why not get some of those rejections out of the way now while I am an undergraduate? And that's precisely what I did. I sent my book out to publishers, and they all rejected the book. I wrote a different book called Josh Had a Bad Haircut, and nobody wanted this book either. So I was lucky enough that upon graduation, I had several rejection letters already tucked away in a folder. So I graduated from art school, and my grandparents said, well, why don't you come home and live with us in Worcester To which I thought, what would be more practical would be to move to Somerville with a bunch of my friends with no real job. You know, and again, you know, it was not a practical choice, but they supported that. And I moved to Somerville with some friends, and I set up an art studio in the corner of a bedroom in an apartment I shared with some friends. And right there on Bow Street in Union Square, I just got to work trying to market myself as somebody who could illustrate books for publishers. And week after week and month after month, I'd mail out these promotional postcards, and I would not hear from anybody. And it got to the point where I'd been sending my books out to publishers for 2 years. 2 years, I had nothing but rejection letters from all of these publishers. But now I kept writing, though, because that's what I love to do. And I wrote a book called Goodnight Monkey Boy. And to get away from my housemates, I'd go down the street, I'd walk down to Davis Square, I'd go to the Someday Cafe. I would go to the Someday, I would sit, I would write, I would draw, I would dream about the future. I would meet with my new author friends who were getting their very first books published. And I was determined to keep going. And here's the beautiful thing about my grandfather. You know, we talk on the phone all the time, and he'd say, well, do you have a job yet? To which I, you know, smart Alec would say, I have a job. I write and illustrate children's books. To which he would reply, well, who pays you for that? You know, and there was a lot of love in that statement, because he was never belittling, but wanting to make sure that I, you know, would find a way to be compensated for my efforts. But he never once said, do you have a real job? He knew I had a job, but knew I also needed to make money via that job in some way. So I kept trying. I mailed out, you know, I was approaching the 2-year anniversary of my first book rejection. And I mailed out another batch of postcards. It was the end of November in 1999. And on a Monday, I mailed out 80 postcards. And that Thursday, I received an email back from an editor at a publisher. And that publisher was Random House Children's Books, which is a big publisher. And she invited me into New York to meet with her. And I went into New York and I showed my portfolio. I showed the stories that I had written. And she liked one idea so much that then and there she offered me a contract for the book. And I went to a payphone and I called my grandfather at work and I called my grandmother at home. And they were so proud, because all of that hard work from not me, but from them paid off. And I had a big book signing in my hometown bookstore. And there was Joe and Cheryl in the center of it, holding court, being so incredibly proud. And that book was dedicated to them. For Grandma and Grandpa, the best parents a kid could ask for. Now, I'll never forget when I received this photo in the mail shortly after the book was published. I didn't know this kid. I've never met this kid. But this kid liked my book so much that he wanted it on his birthday cake. So I framed that photo. It sits in my studio to this day just to remind me who I work for. And wherever this kid is now, this kid is about to celebrate his 22nd birthday. So from that point forward, I kept writing and I kept illustrating and I kept working and I kept getting books published. And when my first book was published, I started to think that maybe I would write a book about my life experiences dealing with my mother's addiction to heroin, dealing with my father's absence, dealing with the fact that while my grandparents loved me and took good care of me, they also drank a lot. But every time I sat down to try to write that book, I would stop out of fear of what people would think by what I had written. This was back in 2000s. And I realized that I was not ready to write a book about my life. So instead, I wrote other books, several other picture books, the Lunch Lady graphic novel series, Jedi Academy, Platypus Police Squad, and now Hey Kiddo. Eventually, I got there. And so, like I said, I have picture books. I have I have graphic novels for younger readers. I have chapter books, and I have books in the Star Wars Jedi Academy series as well. And what a thrill and an honor to travel the country and meet so many young readers who know my books or hear from them via mail or digital technology, to know that kids have been having more birthday parties themed around my books, that these kids who turn up to my book signings and they know the characters better than I do. And to hear from caretakers who would say, your books made my kids want to read. What a thrill and an honor to see people decorating their Halloween pumpkins, people dressing up as my characters for Halloween, people dressing up, kids dressing up as my characters just to dress up as my characters. Twice I got to see my name in lights in Times Square because Lunch Lady was voted as the favorite book of the year in the Children's Choice Book Awards. And if you were to travel in and out of Boston's Logan Airport, you'll see Lunch Lady on a permanent display on a banner celebrating a mural celebrating the children's book characters that came out of the state of Massachusetts. And so for the longest time, I thought that was my happy ending until I found the true happy ending for that kid who loved to draw but was besieged by the addictions of the adults in his family. So I started dating Gina in the summer of 2006. Shortly after, started getting books signed to the both of us. And my author friends were like, wait, you only started dating, like you've been together 6 weeks and you're going to get a first edition hardcover book signed to the both of you? That's a huge commitment. And it was a huge commitment, and which led to a much bigger commitment, which led to us having a family together. And this is the true happy ending for that kid you met in Hey Kiddo. Not seeing my art up in the airport, which is an honor, of course. But that's nothing compared to what you see here. That kid who is able to break the cycle and create his own reality, that I didn't have to have everything happen to my kids that happened to me. So I delivered a TED Talk in October of 2012. And that TED Talk has been viewed about a million, like 1.25 million times, just like 100, 125, something like that, like somewhere over 1 million, which boggles my mind. One, because now time is passing and I'm realizing like there's this much younger version of me telling that same story over and over and over again on the internet. But the morning of that TED Talk, when I woke up that morning, I had no idea I'd be delivering a TED Talk that day, because I wasn't scheduled to give a TED Talk that day. I was a last minute replacement. I received a phone call at noon the day of to say, we had a cancellation. Is there any way you can get over here to deliver a TED Talk? I thought it's a huge honor, and what an opportunity. And I did not know what I was going to talk about, of course, but Gina, my wife, she said, it's so obvious to me, you're not seeing it. You should talk about your childhood. So as I'm pacing the kitchen floor, wondering how I'd pull off this talk, I said, okay, so I'll get up there and I'll say how I love to draw and my mother loved to draw, but she was addicted to drugs. And Gina stopped me. And she said, no, Jarrett, tell them the truth and be honest and be open. Your mother was addicted to heroin. And you should say that. And I heeded her advice. And when I arrived at the venue, they showed me to my seat. The lights went down. The first speaker went up. So I didn't even rehearse this talk. And when my feet hit that stage, I only knew one thing that was an absolute truth in that moment. That whatever I said and did would go on the internet. That's it. I was mic'd. There were cameras on me. And when I revisit that talk now, if I catch a piece of it, I hear the nervousness and the pain and the voice of the 33-year-old me getting up there in front of everybody, and for the first time publicly, talking about my mother's addiction to heroin. And that talk went viral and it was shared all over. And soon enough, I was I'll never forget this. I was recognized at a Dunkin' Donuts. Of course, you know, I'm from New England if I was at a Dunkin' Donuts, right? And I had made the assumption that the person I was talking to was a librarian because I write books and like librarians know who I am, but like regular people at Dunkin' Donuts don't know who I am. But she had just seen the TED Talk and it hit me that like, wow, this stranger knows a lot about me. And what happened is I started traveling the country as I do anyhow, visiting these schools. And I would meet so many young people who also had a parent who was addicted or a parent who was incarcerated, or they were being raised by a grandparent or an aunt or uncle, or they had a parent who had died of a fatal overdose. And there was this real switch where I said, you know what, the story that I've been wanting to write, it's not a matter of do I want to write it, but I need to write it. I have a duty to write it. I've lived this experience. I know this life. I can tell the story in a concrete, unique way. So step one was to begin to put memories down on Post-it notes and place those Post-it notes and memories in a way that would make sense for a narrative. Now, how do I find the courage to draw these loved ones and turn them into quote unquote characters in a book? Now, how do I write the story honestly without censoring myself? More importantly, without censoring my grandparents who use some very colorful language. Because of course, remember now, I'm known as the lunch lady guy. Now I'm going to be telling the story that's really intense. And as I'm writing the story, my mother started getting arrested again. And we spoke. She denied that she was using again. And then she would try to excuse the behavior. I'm not using, I'm just selling it to a guy, you know, for this or that to make some money. And I said, no, you're getting prescriptions at CVS that you should not have in your possession, Mom. And for some time there, the only way that I could keep track of my mother was to go on the website of the Telegram and Gazette, my hometown newspaper, and search in the field my last name and find her latest court records. Nonetheless, I'm trying to write this book. I'm trying to raise this young family. I'm trying to plant my roots out here in Northampton, Massachusetts, where I live now, trying to write this story. And one of the best resources I had were all of my high school sketchbooks. These here are all a bunch of the sketchbooks that I'd kept as a teenager. And going through these sketchbooks, I was hit with just what I was dealing with. You know, my grandparents weren't of the mindset to send me to see a therapist. I wish they had, but thank God they gave me empty sketchbooks so I could work through all of those emotions and feelings through those empty sketchbooks. And when I revisited these sketchbooks as an adult, man, I was really confronted with the anger and frustration I had as a teenager, which helped me write in that voice for this book. Now, I also went on a deep dive into family history. Why did people make decisions? What made people the way they were? Read letters people had written to one another, sifted through documents and read in between lines, interviewed surviving family members on what they can remember about aspects surrounding my youth and my mother's youth. And as I was writing Hey Kiddo, I found a box of personal narratives I had written in 7th grade. And my grandfather had saved every single one of them. And the most powerful one was I interviewed my grandfather in 7th grade. And there I was as an adult. He's no longer with me for me to talk to. But there's my sloppy 7th grade handwriting penning down what he told me in 1990. I worked on my art style to try to change things up so it didn't look too cartoony. Now, David Levithan, one of those authors who was questioning why I was getting books signed to this girl I had just met, he became my editor. And because he's my editor and also my friend, he pointed out that, and he's one of my favorite young adult authors too, he pointed out that I was barely writing about My mother, she was barely in that first draft, and he really helped me shape the story to what it became. And he said, you need to give me about a dozen different scenes with your mother in them. There are memories there somewhere, whether it's memories with her or memories of the absence of her, and they need to be in this book because that is a huge part of the story. And I did my due diligence. I handed that in, and shortly after, my mother passed away, and she did die of a fatal overdose. I hated being right. In her death, I knew that there would be no new pain. I could hold on to the happiest of memories. In her death, I was confronted with the uglier realities of the plight she had dealt with. Growing up, I would say and think, oh, she chose drugs over me. And come to find out that, you know what, she only chose drugs once. And it was well before I was ever born. Years before I was born. She started using in her early teens. She started using, and there was a physiological change in her, and there's nothing she could do about it. If she had to seek out help, and when she didn't seek out help, she faltered, and at the end, she faltered until she died. And my mother was a very talented artist. This is some of her artwork that she had made for me. She, when she was incarcerated or in halfway home, she would always send me cards and letters that she made herself. And at her memorial, I read aloud from these letters that she had written to me, and I saved every single one. And it became so clear to everyone gathered there in that moment that she loved me dearly. And, I read these letters now, and her love is so apparent to me. Any kid could be so lucky to have the love of a mother as my mother loved me. So she never could have been there physically, but she loved me. And when I was reading these letters too, it became so apparent what my book needed to be called. Because the expression, hi kiddo, hey kiddo, well kiddo, kept popping up again and again. Now, memory is weird and memory is tricky. So to trigger memory, I wanted to activate all of my senses. So this toy truck that I'm given as a kid, I wanted to hold it in my hand again. I bought one on eBay. That your sense of smell is your strongest sense to bring back memory. So my grandmother's perfume, my grandfather's aftershave, your sense of hearing music, we have such a strong connection. We hear a song and we can remember just where we were. So I created a playlist on Spotify of just music that I was surrounded by growing up. And then I sat down and I wrote a script. Now, when I write my graphic novels, I write a script just like one would write a TV show or a movie or a stage play where you have the character's name, their dialogue, and then you have stage direction. So this is all of the writing that went into Hey Kiddo. And now I have to take the words and translate it to the visual. And because we read our text from left to right, I'm going to have all of the action flowing from left to right. And I have to sort out not only is the movement going from left to right, but where the word balloons are going to go with the characters and how all of those panels will all fit in. So it becomes very cohesive and easy for the reader to follow. So I have my sketches. In Photoshop, I make sure I have enough space for the text. I create the finished line work, placing that sketch on a light box and using ink on Bristol board. And on a whole separate piece of paper, I draw these ink washes. And that's just the tools that I use. So then before I would bring in that line work, I would bring in those ink washes, and in Photoshop, make it all look like one cohesive piece of artwork. And then using digital tools, I would finish off the artwork that I started off with physical traditional materials. Now, the city of Worcester is like a whole other character in the book. So I spent a day driving around Worcester, photographing landmarks that I knew would be prevalent in the book. Some buildings are no longer standing, like the elementary school I attended as a kid. And I worked with the Worcester Historical Museum to find some photographs so that I could work from those to make this look authentic. So this is typically what my workspace looked like when I was working on Hey Kiddo. Now, the cover, people will judge a book by its cover. They'll judge and figure out if they're going to want to read the book or not based on whether or not the cover is any good. So, it's big deal with the publisher going back and forth, trying to sort out just what we want to convey visually with the cover. So I wanted to convey that this was a story about trauma that takes place over different portions of this young man's life. And so I gave the publisher a whole bunch of different options, and we go back and forth until we find a design that we could all agree on. And whenever you see the Jarrett character in the book draw, you see the actual artwork that I made at that age. My grandfather helped empower me to hold on and save so much of my childhood artwork. And this is everything that went into Hey Kiddo. This is all of the artwork, sketching, books, line work, grayscales, computer printouts. I was fortunate enough that it became a finalist for the National Book Award. And this book that I was terrified to put out there in the world connected with so many people in so many ways. We also made an audiobook of Hey Kiddo. So that really, it sounds very much like an old time radio play. We have about 60 different performers in the book. Professional actors played the part of my grandparents and my mother, but we got the actual people to read as the people featured in the books, including my high school teachers, my sisters, and my buddy Pat. And I am going to stop the share. And now I would love, so there's a little Q&A portal at the bottom. People may have been putting questions in the comment section, but if Ed or Melinda or Jen, if you guys want to come back on screen, you can relay some of the questions that people might have to me, and we could do it that way. If you would like to ask your question directly via your microphone, you can raise your hand digitally. Don't actually raise your hand because we can't see you. You can digitally raise your hand and I'll press the button that allows you to turn your microphone on.
Jared, while people are pulling that together, what an inspirational book this was. I've read it several times, as many people have, and it's absolutely wonderful. I so appreciate it. I was wondering, the question I would ask you is, if you could go back and talk to that little boy, what would you tell him?
I would tell that kid absolutely nothing, Ed, because if I at that age knew that everything was going to work out just fine, then what motivation might I have to work as hard as I did to get beyond that? I don't think, no, I would not go back and tell myself any one thing. I needed to live through what I lived through in order to become the adult I am today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A couple of other questions. Did your grandparents' alcohol use lead to your mother's addiction?
I think that there's probably a direct connection to my grandparents' use of alcohol, to my mother's use of opioids. And I think part of all of that too was the lack of proper diagnosing or an acceptance of mental health. You know, as I mentioned, my grandparents who grew up during the Great Depression, you just didn't talk about your problems. Right. And my grandmother was so clearly dealing with depression and other mental illnesses, but she just didn't deal with it. And that alcoholism led to her rage. And so I kind of hint around with that a little bit with the backstory. And that's why some people would wonder, well, why did you, if this is your memoir, like, why are you starting your story with your grandparents meeting in high school? You know, because I think you have to understand whatever your plight is in life. I think you have to have a little bit of understanding of how everything got to where it is.
Another question is, how have other members of your family reacted to Hey Kiddo?
Well, you know, I was very cognizant of the fact that their story is very much tied in with mine. So everybody who's alive and in it read it before it was published. They read it early drafts, and they got to correct me if I had information wrong. And, my mother died while I was writing it, but that's something I was very concerned about because my mother's last name was Krosoczka, and I did want to respect her privacy, but then how could I protect her privacy with such a unique last name? So we had conversations about the fact that, I was going to be writing a book about growing. I'd be sharing stories about everything, and she was always very open to that. But at the same time, I was fearful. Like, when my grandparents were alive, even when well before Hey Kiddo, like every now and then, they were old, like their names were in like the phone book and stuff, and sometimes they'd get phone calls. But I really, I wish my mother could have read it in that, because I think she'd be really happy to know that she's not the villain in the story. The villain is the drug, and the addiction to the drug, not the person. That, it's not a moral failing, but a physiological failing. Um, and so one of my favorite authors is David Sedaris, and we had a chance to see him speak. And I in the Q&A, I asked him, like, how do you deal with writing about your family? And he said, I don't give away any of their secrets. I thought that was very profound. Of course, you hear that from David Sedaris, you think, well, what in the hell are your family's secrets then? But it's true, like I didn't reveal anything, without permission, and I didn't reveal other things that I know people wouldn't feel comfortable with having be so public. And of course, I had a bit of a name before this happened, but still, there's no telling how far and wide. Once you put something out there, whether it's via a tweet or via printed book, you have no control what becomes of it after that once it's out there.
One of the questions was your story indicates you've forgiven your mother. How did that healing start? How did it begin? How did that? When was that? Was it when you were much younger, or
Well, I think
after you got out of college, or?
when I was much younger, I was just so desperate for her attention and affection. When I was a teenager, I was really angry, and as a teenager, it's not easy being a teenager, in that you're so close to being in charge and control of things, but you're just not. So somewhere between the end of my time in college and after college was some really good years for my mother and me.
Jen, have you got any other questions? I have a couple here, but something about, you mentioned one question. You mentioned siblings were from your grandparents. They were your aunts and uncles. Is that correct or no?
Yeah. So when I say so my yeah, exactly. My grandparents had 5 biological kids, and then me. And then so especially their 2 youngest daughters, who are my aunts, they were 13, 14 when I moved in at 3. So they're very much like my sisters. In fact, the family dynamics too was such that oftentimes my grandparents would talk about my mother as if she was my older sister, because to them, I was the youngest and she was an older sibling.
I'm going to circle back. Oh, sorry, please go ahead.
I was just looking in the chat. There's a really interesting question about, how did you become aware of your mother's addiction? Like, at what point in your childhood or early adolescence did that come up for your family? You mentioned being aware of alcoholism, and you mentioned that your grandfather was prepared with, legal documentation and things to do what he needed to do to be able to raise you. So how did those conversations happen in your family?
Yeah. So when I was in 4th grade, my grandfather sat me down to have like a family meeting, formal conversation. And I was totally caught off guard, because the last time he, in such a serious way, said, let's sit down and have a family meeting, was to say, we're going to Disney World. Right. So I thought, wow, are we going again? And he just sat me down and just said, I'll never, he said, we've decided it's time that you know the truth about your mother. So he was waiting for sort of an age appropriate time to give me a better understanding of just what she was dealing with. Also knowing that looking ahead, he had another kid that was getting older and needed to be aware of the perils of drug use. But in regards to like understanding my grandparents were alcoholics, I dealt with it growing up. That label was never applied to them. But things got really scary when my grandmother got very drunk, between things getting smashed around the house or her falling down the stairs.
I feel like it was almost a cultural norm of that generation
Yeah.
to utilize alcohol as, kind of self-care and recreation and coping mechanisms. Oftentimes our older generation was functional alcoholism was a real thing in most households. You see it. So thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of times our families really struggle with how do you have the conversations with your children and your adolescents about their other, your co-parent who may or may not be absent. And how do you start to have the conversations to open the door so they can talk about their feelings?
I think that, the truths are extremely difficult to talk about, but truth is incredibly empowering to young people.
You do your presentation, Jarrett, across the country and probably internationally you presented, I imagine. What are some of the things that children will come up to you and share with you?
I would say one of the most powerful things a young person ever said to me was that he didn't realize he was allowed to be angry. So his mother was also addicted to drugs, and he didn't realize he was allowed to have the emotion of anger. And that to me was better than any special thing I might get for this book, because that's an incredibly powerful thing to give to somebody, to let them know that you're allowed to feel every emotion you feel about this.
Great. Great. Well, the last question I have, and I don't know if it's anyone else, but I'm going to circle back to my first question to what would you tell the young Jarrett? But as the program we have, and we deal with young children, teenagers, et cetera, who live with someone with substance use disorder, what's that message you would give to them?
Yeah, and what I would say to young people that are dealing with it today, as someone who's gone through it, is that one of the most beautiful things about growing up is that then you get to dictate how your life goes. There'll always be external factors, right? Like if I was fully deciding how my life was going, I wouldn't have been stuck in my home since March, right? But be within a certain amount of control that you have in your life. If you work hard enough, you're going to decide what kind of parent you want to be. I have 3 kids. I sometimes find that angry grandmother, the angry Shirley coming out through me sometimes, the way that I snap and yell at my kids. And it doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me happy. So I have the power now to okay, I'm going to work on this. I can talk to my therapist. I can find other coping mechanisms. I answer to no one but the family that I created. I'm not beholden to dealing with everything that I dealt with as a kid. Certainly growing up in high school and in college, was definitely aware of what was running through my DNA as I was, if I'm going to a party, my freshman year of college, I'll tell you, like I get to the point where I'm like, I think I'm just partying a little bit too much and drinking too much. I can see here at 19 years old, the fork in the road. And to just check myself, and I feel so fortunate that I've been able to carve out this life for me that I have.
It's great. Any members of the other panelists, or Melinda or Jen, if you got any other questions or thoughts? I'd like to spend hours talking to you, but I imagine you want to put 3 kids to bed at some point.
Well, the thing is, if we wait long enough, they'll put themselves to bed.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. I'll say, oh no, the meeting went till 9. Like I'll just stay down here.
It looks like some therapists in our chat were interested to know if you had therapy, and you did just mention that. Do you have anything you'd like to say to our therapists in the audience?
Well, I hope that you all are talking to good therapists too, because I can't even imagine how much you're shouldering now in this day and age of COVID-19. But you're doing such important work, and if you're helping those soda bottles that have been shaken to slowly open so they don't explode. It's such important work.
As usual, I'm going to give my friend Melinda Nealon the last word, and I'm going to thank you so much for all you've done and for what you've brought to us. This is, as I said, a real inspiration to all of us. And as we move this program along, we kind of keep it as we keep a whole bunch of copies and we hand out a lot. So
Oh,
if people
thank you,
want
Ed.
some, we're happy to make sure that they get some.
Well, you know what,
Melinda,
Ed, the world
Yep.
will open up, and we'll meet for a cup of coffee in Plymouth somewhere.
I would love to meet in Worcester at the Coney Island.
Oh, Coney Island. I miss Coney Island so much. I miss it so much. Oh, we'll meet at Coney Island. That's even better. Yeah.
That is better. So I just want to thank you so much. We are so grateful to spend this time with you, to hear so many of us on this call, on the meeting tonight too. We're coming with a lived experience, so we connect to your story in a variety of different ways. And it's just beautiful to have something tangible to be able to use as a tool, but also a beacon of hope and inspiration and an opportunity to build resilience and have these conversations in our community. So we're really grateful and thankful for you. If it's possible, I'd like to leave the chat open just for a couple more minutes, because we're going to share some resources from the Grandparents Commission, so that if caregivers and grandparents are in need of support, they can get connected. We're also going to make sure you have your information for our Family Center and the Handle with Care website to be able to share additional resources. And we just thank you. We're so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen, any last words?
No, great presentation. Thank you so much, Jarrett. This was
No,
everything
thank
we
you.
hoped it would be.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you, Jen. I appreciate it.
Much better. Yeah, great.
And we'll get the link to the recording for you too, so you can share if anyone missed it.
Yeah, we'll put that on the website tomorrow. As soon as we get it, we'll get it from you.
Sure.
As soon as
Thank
we
you.
get it. The DA's office will host it on their website.
Yep. For thanking us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
think checking off, right?
Any advice you would give to young aspiring authors?
Oh, I'm realizing, was Colleen wanting to share this, or if you want to share something with everybody are you guys looking to put stuff in the chat for people?
I thought we were in the selection of panelists and everyone. Is that working? I might not have with the last
I think
one.
it might have just gone to the panelists, Belinda.
Okay, what about the Grandparents Commission? Did that go to everyone? No?
That just went to
Sorry.
us. Here, I'll cut and
Sorry
paste
about
that one
that.
for you. There you go.
Got it. Thank you.
I was just looking through it.
I know, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This is why I do social work and I'm not an IT person.
Here we go. I'll cut and paste this one too.
Yeah. I think we got most of your questions. If not, we're definitely going to send out the video and we'll make sure you have additional resources to get connected to everyone.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Melinda. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Jen.
Thank
safe.
you.
Appreciate
Great to
it.
meet you
Be
in
well.
person.
Be well. Thank you.
Thank you.